If you could create an entire channel from the ground up now that has nothing to do with what you currently do, what would it be on?
We have a bunch of ideas. I don't know if I want to give them away because some of them we might actually be working on.
What are the most common mistakes that beginners make when it comes to titles and thumbnails?
When I started my gaming channel, like one of the kind of subtle reasons for doing that was because I was like, oh, then I can play games and feel like I'm being productive. Playing games is like 10% of it. 90% of it is like all of the other stuff.
Welcome back to Inside the Creator Studio, an origin story podcast about the world's best video content creators. My name's Katie.
And my name is Mo. On today's episode, we have Marcus Radis Jones, who runs a YouTube channel called Grow Your Gaming Channel with over 150,000 subscribers. And we're going to talk to him about how he got started, why he broadened his niche from just gaming-specific advice to all YouTubers, and what he would do if he were to start a new channel today.
This show is brought to you by Streamyard, a browser-based tool that lets you live stream to multiple platforms at the same time and record remote podcasts in studio quality. It's built for creators to make your job way easier. It's what we use to record this show.
Okay. All right. Hi, Marcus. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to start with some rapid fire questions, so try to keep it short for these. What is your setup for this call? Computer, camera, mic, light?
So I have a key light and a fill light, which sounds really impressive and professional, but they're just from Newer and cost like $50. I have an LED strip in the back, which is also incredibly cheap. It's like $15. I have Blue Yeti, which you can probably get secondhand for about $40-$50. And I have a webcam, which is the Insta 360.
What was the last meal you ate today?
Haven't eaten.
Oh yeah, because it is 9 a.m. for you. So you're tuning in early, which we appreciate.
I am.
Did you mention your computer?
Oh, I didn't. Sorry. It's a custom build PC, so it'd be a bit complicated to go through it all.
Got it. Gamer PC.
Nice.
Who were your inspirations when you started as a YouTuber?
When I first started, I really liked the Gaming Lemon. I think he had some really funny videos. There was also a YouTuber who was very little known. He only had like 4,000 or 5,000 subscribers, I think. But I remember I watched every single one of his videos, and he really kind of inspired a lot of the type of content I did. And it was super weird because I eventually ended up like significantly surpassing him in subscribers. So it's like a super weird feeling. But yeah, his name was Two Moose for You. I don't even know if he's around anymore. But those are probably the two main influences on my first channel. And then if we fast forward to kind of the current one I'm running, I mean, I study all of my competitors. Like I have a list of like 200 and something different channels that do YouTube advice and education. Most people don't realize how many channels there are actually out there that do that kind of stuff. And I think I take a little bit of inspiration from all of them when I see things that work or when I see things that don't work. But I wouldn't say there's like a specific figurehead that I necessarily try to emulate myself after as much as I did when I was first starting.
Got it.
That's
what
great.
are your top 3 games of all time?
Top 3 games of all time. I mean, Star Wars Battlefront is very close to my heart because that was like one of the games that blew me up. I'd have to say, I remember I played way too much Minecraft back in the day, as we all did. And there's a game that is called, not many people know about it. It's called Mountain Blade. It's like a medieval type open world game. And I remember grinding that for an unhealthy amount of time.
Okay, cool. And what hobbies have you spent the most time on this year besides gaming?
Okay, I should actually clarify. I haven't played games in about a year, so I don't play games very much anymore just because YouTube takes up too much time. It was funny because when I started my gaming channel, like one of the kind of subtle reasons for doing that was because I was like, oh, then I can play games and feel like I'm being productive. But like playing games is like 10% of it, and then 90% of it is like all of the other stuff that comes with running a channel if you want to do it properly most of the time, unless you're like you happen to have like an extremely catchy personality and you're like a streamer / let's player. So yeah, I haven't played games in ages. In terms of hobbies, that's kind of a tough one because I normally have heaps of hobbies, but I injured my ACL, which is like a ligament in your knee. So I haven't been able to do a lot of the things that I normally do. So yeah, I guess guitar. I recently took up debating because I'm like, well, what's something competitive that I can do with an ACL, right? Because I'm a very competitive person.
That's so funny.
That was basically like the only thing, right? So it was funny. I went to after having done 3 debates in my life, I went to like the Australian National Championships just for the lols. And I got hammered. I think I came like 92 out of 104.
Oh my
but
gosh.
It was just really funny because yeah, I got mentally annihilated. But I'm like, all these guys have been debating like all their life, and they're like, oh yeah, so how long have you been debating for? I'm like 3 debates in total.
You tried it. It was a challenge.
It was. I think it kind of complements YouTube.
Yeah.
One of the things I don't think I'm that good at is speaking extemporaneously and concisely. You should see my editing files. They're like an hour long, and my editor's like, oh god, this again, and they cut it down to like 10 minutes. So it's a really good way, I think, to learn to speak more concisely.
That's great. Did you tear your ACL, or did you?
I did. I fully tore it. Yeah, I fully tore it, and I also injured my meniscus a little bit.
Oh my god, that's brutal. That's like,
yeah.
Did you have to get surgery?
I actually tried an experimental thing where basically you brace it for 3 months in like an L-shaped position, and you pretty much wear the brace like nonstop. So even when you're sleeping, all that kind of thing. And they tried to re-heal it manually. So it was like experimental because I was like patient 320, so like relatively new. But it worked. Well, it seems to have worked so far. I'm about 5 months in. I've got about 8 months to go. So
wow, that's wild. I mean, you're probably a good test subject because you're not going into an office or anything like that.
Yeah.
So you could stay relatively off your feet. But
yeah,
I just wondered because that's a brutal recovery time. So
yeah, have you done an ACL or something like that?
No, I have friends who have though. I used to dance and I also played sports, and it was like someone got their ACL. It's just 6 months or a year. Just brutal.
Can you tell us the story of how you got into YouTube when you were 14 years old?
Yeah. So I had always been interested in like creating stuff. Like I was that kid who played with Lego for probably too long. I also like would create these little stop motion videos and all that kind of thing. And I remember one day I was like at a family picnic, and I was talking to my aunt, and she was like, oh, have you seen Paige's YouTube channel? I'm like, what? So Paige is like my cousin, right? She was like same age as me. Only cousin I had was the same age as me. She created this YouTube channel, got 2,000 subscribers, and had one video get like 20,000 views. And I remember that like kind of blew my mind because at the time I was like, how like surely you have to have some sort of like professional skills or like be like an exceptional personality or something like that to succeed on YouTube. And nothing against Paige, but like she was kind of like me. I was like, well, if she can do it, like maybe I could as well, just regular pleb me. So I didn't actually start right away because as you do, you procrastinate. But I started about 6 months later, promptly sucked for about a year. And then finally after the end of that period, I was kind of like figuring out all the things that worked. But over the course of that year, I posted about 65 different videos and got like 150 subscribers. So it was a bit of an epic failure. But then something clicked, and that's kind of what sent me on the trajectory I am. And I went from getting like 15 subscribers per month to like 1,500 subscribers per month, and just went from there.
That's cool. What would you say clicked? I mean, maybe that's indescribable, but what do you think that change was.
Yeah. Well, for me, there was like a specific change that made sense. And that was like I found a good niche that had a good balance of supply and demand that was in my favor. And then the algorithm started working for me. But something that I think is really important to note is it's multifactorial, which I know heaps of people say, but like maybe a way to think about it is if you imagine like a corridor and then there's like success at the end of that corridor, and that corridor has like multiple doors. Like you can open the first one or two or three doors and you're still going to get zero of the success because it's still behind the door. You can open all of the doors except for one and you're still going to have zero of the success at the end of the corridor because there's still that one door in your way. And then when you open that door, it all comes flooding in exponentially, that final door. So I think that's kind of maybe a way to think about it, because a lot of people ask me like, oh, what's the number one thing you have to do to succeed? I'm like, it's X. But even if you do X, if you don't do Y, Z, V, A, and all these other things, like it's still not going to matter. So you have to kind of have those main doors all opened in order to kind of experience that success. So over the course of that year, even though I was like an abject failure in terms of stats, I was kind of slowly opening those doors. And even though I was like getting no success because those final few doors weren't open, once I did open those final few doors, it allowed the success to flow all the way back down the corridor, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. You were sort of experimenting and seeing what worked, maybe. Yeah, and learning as you went. I really liked how in the talk you gave at UTS Startup Summit, you admitted to still having insecurities and feelings of embarrassment when you're at the level of success that you are, but you've, instead of just sort of getting over it, you've just continued to do what you wanted to do anyway. Because I think a lot of people think once I'm confident, I can do X or Y. What made you come to that realization? Was it sort of trial and error? Was it a positive comment you received or a milestone you reached, or maybe just a sudden realization?
Yeah, I'm usually not that smart to come to those conclusions on my own. So I probably heard it in some like podcasts or something. I listen to like a lot of podcasts and read a lot of books and stuff. But yeah, it's kind of like a game changer because, I always used to think that I had to be confident, or I had to not feel those feelings. And the kind of, mindset shift that I could have insecurities and negative feelings and be embarrassed and all this kind of stuff, but still just do it anyway, kind of like alleviates some of the pressure. Because when you're doing it and you have those feelings and you don't have the mindset that it's okay to have those feelings, you start thinking, well, maybe this isn't for me. Like maybe like this is just not very enjoyable, like blah, 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 blah. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why a lot of people quit.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's great that you bring up that once you're doing the thing that say you want to do, but you almost have the mindset of like, if I'm not enjoying it, if I'm anxious, then I'm not the person for it, or I'm not doing it right. But to work through that, then you can almost get on the other side of it, or even halfway there. I think that's really good advice, because I sort of reflected myself and I was like, oh, okay, that's helpful to think about, even though it was subconscious maybe in other things.
I wonder if it is like kind of similar in like acting.
Oh my God, for sure. I've been acting for a really long time, and there's still times when I'm like creating a reel and I'm like, no, I'm not good enough to be doing this. Meanwhile, I've done it for over 10 years. I'm like, why would I keep doing this? And why have I persisted doing this if it wasn't constantly overcoming those fears, or I don't know, really working despite it? So yeah, I think it's true. I think it's great advice.
Over those like feelings, like is there like a technique or
a
mental model?
Spinning the microphone around to me. I don't know. I think a lot of times, even with the podcast too, I think I still see those fears and anxieties coming up when I'm recording, just doing this, me through that, but also doing the podcast and it being like, oh, you don't seem like you're nervous. Just, you're fine. You'll do it and you'll get through it. And I have a great co-host too. I mean, Mo's much quieter than me, but he's very rock solid. So I think sort of being having a co-host is helpful as well. So if you feel like you're going off track and you feel anxious, you can sort of lean on someone else. Yeah, but I think it's like you said, like powering through it and not thinking like, oh, I'm nervous, so therefore it's not for me. Just knowing that you have something to offer the conversation still.
Yeah.
Yeah. Marcus becomes one of the co-hosts. That's so funny. Changes niche completely.
Yeah, podcasting. I actually have never had a successful podcast or anything like that, so it might be something to try one day.
You probably would.
You do interviews, and they're really good actually.
Thanks. I feel like they're not really a podcast though. They're very pre-produced, post-produced.
But that's okay. I think that can be the same thing. You could also probably make a YouTube video and then just rip the audio if you sort of don't lean on doing so many visual elements. I guess we're just talking about what we do too. I mean, we're at the beginning of it, but I think we're constantly thinking about it too. Like, what are people experiencing? Because like you said, I'm also a big podcast listener. And I miss things if I'm just listening, not watching. But you also want to offer something to video watchers because video podcasts are getting more and more popular. So what can you do to engage both audiences? I think it's a challenge that people are still trying to overcome.
Yeah. I think we live in this age where there's so many different options. The hardest thing is like figuring out which one to double down on, and it's going to give you the most ROI. And I kind of like have a bit of that shiny object syndrome. So like whenever I jump on a podcast or I'm interviewed or something, I'm like, oh, maybe I should start a podcast. And it's like, even though technically it shouldn't take up that much extra time, you're like, oh, I could get someone to schedule it all out for me, and I just have to jump on the interviews, and I'd send it off to editors, and they could produce it, and then someone else could like record, like whatever. It sounds really simple, but it's going to be an extra time, and it also takes up mental RAM. I find all these other little projects take up that little bit of mental RAM, and it's just in the back of your mind, and yeah, it's a tough one to balance. It's like how can I diversify and experiment with different things and keep innovating without straying from the things that are already working? Because usually if you just double down on the things that are already working, you're going to get way better results than if you spread that out across multiple different facets.
Yeah.
100%.
In my experience.
Yeah. That's actually a really good lead into some of Mo's next questions that he has prepared.
Yeah, like I noticed that you have an extremely focused on YouTube. You like don't do lives, you don't do shorts. You have like 2 shorts up. You just do videos, and then in terms of like your bio, you just have one call to action or link in your profile, and it's to your course. And that's basically all you do is like YouTube videos, and then you have your course. Like, were these conscious choices to be focused, like you just said, to double down on what's working, or like what's the philosophy behind this focus?
Yeah, read the links. That's a pretty simple one. That's a conscious one because I kind of have 2 goals on the channel. It's like, one, get people to watch as much content as I can get them to watch. It's like basically increase the session time, basically. And then 2 is obviously to make money because that's how you survive. The link thing is basically decision fatigue. So they did a study where they took I think it was like a bunch of different flavors of jam, and they set up a store and tried to sell them, and they measured how many sales they could get, and then they took away a bunch of the flavors and only had 3 and tried to sell as many as they could. And most people would think that with multiple flavors you're going to be able to cater to multiple different people, and so you're going to get more sales with the multiple different flavors. But they found that limiting it and bringing it all the way down and just presenting a few options or one option actually led to less decision fatigue. It's kind of like when you go to a restaurant and the menu has like a gazillion good things on it, and you're like, oh my God, what one am I going to pick? And you spend like 3 hours on the menu and then like 30 minutes actually eating. And then while you're eating, you're thinking, oh man, maybe I should have had something else.
All the time.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. And so that's why I try to keep it as simple as possible. One call to action, preferably. So that's that. With the video / live stream thing, I kind of just focus on YouTube videos because I think they have the best ROI for me. I think you can get a lot of views with YouTube Shorts. like I have friends and other channels I've worked on that are getting 50 and 80 million views a month with shorts. So it is true that shorts are like the gold rush is kind of slowing down compared to what it was, but you can still get a lot of views with them. I just find that the quality of traffic is not as good with shorts. And when I say quality of traffic, what I mean is that if you get, say, 1,000 views on a long form video, there's going to be probably you would need to get like 10,000 views on a short to get the same amount of people that would take some sort of action on that piece of content. So whether that action is going to your website, whether that action is subscribing, whether that action is going to another one of your videos, actually maybe not subscribing because people do subscribe to shorts, but like going back to another one of your videos, all that kind of thing. So while I think if I pumped shorts, I could probably get a lot more views, I don't know that it would be attracting the kind of person who would actually ultimately want to take the actions that I want them to take on my channel, which is watch more long form videos. So yeah, that's kind of that. Live streams, I probably could do them, but I try to, I don't know how I feel like about like committing myself to something, like doing something live every week where I have to be there every single week. Like the value of content is that I can kind of create it whenever is convenient for me. And I'm not kind of like locked into a schedule. I kind of hate being locked in to like a specific schedule. Like my previous job, like I worked in marketing for like 3.5 years. I actually love that job. But one of the reasons like I decided to leave was because I was like, I want to have 100% control over my time and my future. And that's just not something that a job was able to any job was able to provide me unless I was the one giving myself said job. So live streaming kind of semi violates that kind of desire for as much freedom as possible that I have. So it's not really a strategic decision there. It's just like more of a lifestyle decision.
And like even on your older channel, I noticed you were already talking a little bit about like YouTube growth, and you had some call to actions where you would have people sign up for an email list and stuff like that. And so you're like, a teenager at that point, maybe, and it just feels like you're very precocious in terms of business knowledge. Like, where does that come from? I'm curious if like your parents are into business, or like what dinner table conversations were like when you were growing up. Feel free to tell us about like that story.
So my parents, I think, are definitely like a little bit, have like a bit of a more entrepreneurial mindset. They're not entrepreneurs, but they kind of are like much more open to that world and aware of that world maybe than other people. I don't know. I think when it started off, when I was a kid, I wanted to be the Prime Minister for Australia because I thought, when you're a kid, you're like, what's well, for me, like one of my fundamental values is like freedom. And so like, I'm like, what's the thing that's going to give me the maximum amount of freedom? And I was like, well, if I'm just like the leader of the country, then no one can tell me what to do. So I'm just going to be the Prime Minister. And then I realized that being the Prime Minister would suck. So, I was like, what's kind of like the next thing that I could do? And I was like, well, I mean, like owning a business would give you like a lot of freedom. And so that kind of was always, I didn't quite know what I was going to do or how I was going to do it. But in the back of my mind, I always kind of wanted to ultimately own some sort of business or work for myself. And even though my parents weren't super familiar with that area, they were, like I said, aware of it and they kind of encouraged it. So I was really lucky in that regard. That's kind of what led to it all. It was just like always like a subtle desire. And so when I was going through like creating my old channels and stuff, I didn't have any of those call to actions or stuff. I kind of like added them in later. But I was always kind of aware of it, of like, how can I turn this into a business as well? Because at the end of the day, like everyone needs money to survive. Every business needs money to survive. And I kind of realized, the more money I make, the more time I can afford to invest into doing the things that I love. And so I need to be able to not just maximize views and stuff, but also maximize that side of my channel and actually make sure that it's a sustainable business. Otherwise, everything else kind of falls in a heap.
And so you mentioned that you made the decision to not go to college. So have you been a full-time YouTuber since after high school?
No, I've been full-time since February this year. I guess my risk tolerance is probably not as good as it should be. So I wanted to be like very much kind of like locked in and 100% like, okay, this is like very much working before I like went full-time. Before this, I worked at a marketing agency for like 3 days a week for like 3.5 years. And that was like a really good kind of experience to learn like a lot more skills about business and about marketing. And a lot of those skills translate across to YouTube and get some experience in the real world, quote unquote. But it was also a really great opportunity because I could then like do that for 3 days a week and then work on my different channels and projects and other things like for the other 3 days a week. Because over the years, I've probably had like 7 or 8 different projects or businesses that I've worked on, most of which have failed, but you kind of have to go through that to find that thing that works. So yeah.
Could you explain some of those skills that you just mentioned that help you as a YouTuber? Like what are some like specific skills that you learned at that agency? Is it like copywriting, stuff like that?
Yeah, I think understanding how to create content that will attract attention is useful. Because obviously, like in advertisements, you want people to watch your advertisement, you want people to read your headline, you want people to read your blog or whatever it is. And so even though the mediums are slightly different, knowing that kind of like base level psychological stuff is really useful in YouTube as well. I would say that YouTube almost helped me like more with advertising than advertising did with YouTube. So like I remember like taking a lot of lessons and stuff that I would learn through experimenting with YouTube and applying them to like clients and stuff I was working on at the agency, and like it was doing well. But yeah, that was really useful. I think also it's useful to understand like the business side of things. So like how to set up a website, how to track links, how to like create a product and sell a product and all that kind of thing. Because like at the end of the day, if you aren't making money, you can't sustain yourself or continue creating that level of content that you're creating or pay your employees or anything like that. So that was definitely invaluable to have learned.
And what do you think made them hire you in the first place? Was it because you already had these experiences and skills building up YouTube channels?
Yeah, so I was like 17, I think. And I'm always like interested in like the ways that I can, the back doors, like the kind of growth hacking, like what are some things that I can do to like skip ahead of everyone else just by like thinking smarter. And I was like, well, what if I just go to like random like marketing, like networking groups and stuff and just see what happens when I talk to people. And yeah, so I was like this 17-year-old kid going to like these marketing network groups, like all these like older people. And I'll just like talk to people there and like build relationships and all that kind of thing. And it was funny because I think aside from the first one I went to, after that, every single one I went to, I got offered some sort of job or work experience.
Wow.
So yeah, it was pretty interesting. And I remember I ended up working for 2 companies as a result of that. So I worked as a videographer for like a year, again, not full time, but worked doing that. So that was really useful because I had a bunch of the skills I wanted to learn. And then after that, I really wanted to learn about marketing. And so same thing, basically went to these networking groups, met a guy. I was like, hey, I know like a lot about YouTube. Like I want to join your company. I'll work for free. I don't care. Like I just want to help out and I want to learn from you guys. And so I remember I worked for them for free for like 6 weeks and then they offered me a job and then I really liked it. So I stayed for a while. But that's kind of like a little hack, I think. If you have like a little bit of an X factor or something that makes you a little bit different, or you have like a skill that you can develop on the side and then just go to these groups. Because most of these people didn't know anything about YouTube. They knew about like paid ads, about Facebook, especially like at that time, YouTube was still kind of a bit newer compared to what it is now. So yeah, that's kind of how I ended up with that job. And then kind of when I started, like I was literally the lowest of the low because I couldn't, like I was not even getting paid. And then by the time I left, it was like a small company, so it's not that impressive. But by the time I left, I was like essentially like the unofficial second in charge. So that's pretty funny.
That is a pretty big deal when you're that young, you know, and especially starting from sort of like just finding your way and asking around and just being savvy. I have another question, but I want to go to this one because it's sort of on the same train of thought. You are young with a ton of experience. Do you feel like you experience people misjudging you or misjudging your skill set or knowledge because of your age? Or do you feel like you have to prove yourself, or do you feel like people sort of see the work you've done before they see the age?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I have thought about that, especially when I worked at the agency. Like one of the reasons I grew the beard was because it made me look older. Because I remember like I was talking to clients and I was leading clients, right? And like some of the clients I would work on, like not huge, but like we were spending, 50K like a month kind of thing. And I was like heading up those campaigns. And it's like some 18-year-old kid like directing where 50 grand a month is going to go to like their marketing spend. And I'm like, oh, they're not going to take me seriously. So like I grew a beard or that kind of thing. But then I also tried to like let the results speak for themselves where I could and just like lead with that. Because I feel like no matter how old or young you are, if you can just show a really objectively qualifying or impressive track record, then most of the time, most reasonable people will be like, they'll overlook the fact that you're 18 or 19 or whatever it is. I think to like answer the part of your question about like whether I still feel like I have to prove myself, I think to a degree everyone has to prove themselves a little bit in the kind of the space that I'm currently in. Like you have to show some sort of credibility or social proof because there's so many like kind of fake gurus out there. I think it's just finding that balance where it's like not egotistical, not shamming, like jamming all of your irrelevant successes down people's throats, but like you're showing enough to be like here's an example that proves that I can do what I'm telling you I know how to do, that you can see for yourself and objectively verify. And now let's get into the less egotistical, braggadocious content.
Yeah. I just wonder because I think you've done so much at such a young age, but sometimes people just see that and sort of let that precede everything you've done. And I think YouTube is such a special space because you are seeing people of all ages come up and make careers or second careers out of it, but there isn't really any rules of like, okay, when you get to this age, you are usually in a director's position, something like that. So I think it's still sort of, people are still sort of trying to, I don't know, like take themselves seriously or, yeah. And I think at the age that you are, you have done great things, but it doesn't mean that, I don't know, you won't continue to do great things, but maybe someone like twice your age will get to the point you are at, but it'll take them much longer. There's not really like a set trajectory is sort of what I'm getting at.
Yeah, no, it's true. I think there's like pros and cons to everything. It's like if you're really young but you have like great results, everyone's like, oh, if that like dumb 18-year-old kid can do it, then surely I can do it too. If you're older, you have a bit more credibility because there's like the social proof where it's like, okay, this person's been around the traps for a bit. They have some experience. So I guess it's like you just got to pick wherever you're at, you've got to pick, like find whatever your angle gives you the most strength and then lean into that.
Yeah. And your age also gives you some leverage, I think, in the YouTube area because the age range of like people in their 20s or early 30s are when YouTube really started to pop off. So you have the advantage of being younger, I think, too. But again, things are constantly changing. So I think there's someone like Mr. Beast who is still really young, but is so successful. Yeah. It's just an interesting conversation to have. What's a typical day in your life like? How big is your team, and what was the process of building a team like?
Okay. A typical day. I don't know if there is a typical day, but like some of the common things that come up is like meetings with the team, creating content. So usually I'm very much in charge of like the actual content creation process, coming up with the ideas, actually recording and scripting the content, obviously, that kind of thing. Then I get some help with the editing side and thumbnails. Like then I spend like a bunch of time like reviewing that and giving feedback on that and all that kind of thing. But the actual physical editing, I don't do a lot of anymore. Also, I help out with my students like a bunch. So I try to make them be as successful as they can. So that's with the program that I run. Those would probably be the main things that I try to focus on. Aside from just like basic life stuff, like working out, hanging out with people, like that kind of stuff. Building a team. So we currently have 7 people, but it's like 5 full-timers. And basically that kind of, in the beginning, I remember that started with my gaming channel actually, because like I said, I kind of would have like in the back of my mind that I want to try and work smarter than the competition and like think from a business perspective as well. And so I was like, well, I can't create enough content because I'm just one person and I don't have all of my time to invest into this. So what if I can pay other people to create some of that content for me? So I remember I built up the team for that channel to like 8 people and then realized that 8 was way too big and I had no idea how to manage 8 people. So then the next time I built up a team around the next channel, which was this one, we started off a lot smaller and we sat at around 3 to 4 for a while. But just kind of now we've started to expand a little bit more. One, because I want to create more content and higher quality content, and also experimenting with some other projects and other channels and all that kind of thing.
Cool. And can you tell us more about your students and your experience educating other people, and where did that come from other than just your channel where you teach people how to grow their channels? What is it like educating people maybe one-on-one or in a smaller setting?
Yeah, I've always really enjoyed teaching people. Like it's just something that is very fulfilling to me. When I was like younger, I used to teach a lot of like robotics. So I'd like teach after school classes and stuff like that. Then in the marketing agency, like one of my roles was like head of growth because I really enjoyed teaching. So I'd like find all the cool new things that were going on in the industry, and then I'd like have like little presentations, like little sessions with people, and try to like introduce new ways of thinking or new skills or that kind of thing. So it just, and then with YouTube, like kind of one of the main ways or reasons I started the channel I currently had was usually once you've worked on or start up a few like channels in the past, people start asking you like, oh, how do you get subscribers? How do you grow, etc. And are engaging really enthusiastically in those conversations. I mean, like, this is really fun. It's something that I've kind of like obsessed over. So it's fun. Like when you find someone who wants to talk about it, because in my real life, everyone's just like, nerd, don't want to talk about that. So yeah, it kind of just led from there. And kind of when I started creating that education content, the content was really bad. But it got a significant amount of attention. So I'm like, oh, there's some demand here. And so that's when I started putting a bit more effort into it. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, for sure. I think, yeah, absolutely.
On your current channel, which is called Grow Your Gaming Channel, you started off by focusing specifically on like advice for gaming channels. But to me, more recently, it feels like you've broadened that scope a little bit. How did you make that decision?
Yeah. So one of the kind of things I talk about a lot is like, I think it's a lot easier to pick a niche and start off in a niche. There are multiple reasons for that. But I think some of the main ones it gives you a lot more practice creating a similar type of content and really getting to know the pains and gains and desires and benefits and stuff of that space that you can hinge off of. I also think it helps with the algorithm, because if it's promoting to a very targeted audience, then the likelihood that those people are going to click is going to be much higher than if you're just creating content for a very general audience, or a much more general audience. But the disadvantage of picking a niche is that you kind of limit your reach, and you kind of limit diversification in a certain sense. So I think ultimately the goal of every channel should be to be a bit diversified, or if you're not diversified, be in a niche that's very, very much not going away anytime soon. So the goal was always like to gradually expand out into just general education. And yeah, currently I'm still Grow Your Gaming Channel brand wise, but all of the content, as you used to mention, you notice, is like shifted from just talking about gaming channels to just talking about general YouTube. So maybe I'll rebrand at some point to just maybe my name or something like that. But that's kind of like the step that we're working towards. And it's kind of like that, so I can reach a broader amount of people and be a little bit more diversified across different types of channels. And also personally, from a personal interest point of view, I am interested in working with more people who aren't just gaming YouTubers. Not that there's anything wrong with gaming YouTubers, but it's just more fun for me to have a bit more variety in the people I'm helping and working with. One last thing, I've talked a lot about this, but one last thing that I think was really interesting to me was that, so kind of the way the algorithm works, right, is one of the main tenets of it is collaborative filtering, which is essentially it'll look at people who have viewed certain videos and enjoyed those videos, send the algorithm positive signals, and then we'll go, okay, who are some other people who are very similar to these people who have viewed and enjoyed these videos, and how can we let's promote those videos to those other people who are similar. So it's kind of like a lookalike audience, maybe, is a way to think about it for those who know marketing. So I think, I could be wrong because there's no really way to verify this, but I think one of the things that was limiting some of my videos was because they're very gaming focused, and they had gaming in the title, gaming in the thumbnail, etc. It could grow to a certain point, but then it would cap out. And the reason for that is because I'm guessing there's a lot of crossover between viewers of general education content and viewers of just gaming YouTube education content. Well, I should say general YouTube education content. And so I think what was happening is that I'd start off in this smaller kind of pool. It'd push it out to all the people who it knew were interested in learning how to grow gaming YouTube channels. And then as it would start to expand, because I had gaming in the title and the thumbnail and all that kind of thing, these other more general YouTube education viewers wouldn't click, and it would send negative signals to the algorithm. And so it would kind of just start killing the video earlier than it should have been killed. So I don't know, there's no way to kind of prove that, but I think that's what was happening. And it makes sense when you kind of understand how the algorithm works. So it was sort of a strategic decision in that sense as well, because it was I think the algorithm was killing my videos earlier than it should have, because of that kind of crossover effect. Yeah, that's something I've been thinking about. It's interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. We wanted to get some practical, high-level advice from you. What are the most common mistakes that beginners make when it comes to titles and thumbnails?
Maybe we can start with titles. So titles, one of the mistakes I think people make is they make it too long, and they don't realize that the titles are going to be truncated or cut off on many devices. So you have to be able to hook people in the first couple of words. Otherwise your title is usually not very relevant. I would think people usually also tend to put too many keywords in their titles. So you need to think about it in a sense that there's two types of content, right? There's searchable content and then browse-based content. So an example of a searchable video would be how to tie your shoe. And someone would type that into the YouTube search bar, the video would come up, and then they click on it. Whereas Mr. Beast's video of every country fights for $250,000, no one's like going to YouTube search and like typing that in, right? That's all coming from YouTube algorithm promoting it on their homepage and recommended, et cetera, et cetera. And I think a mistake that a lot of people make with their titles is they have browse-based content. So content like Mr. Beast, for example, that no one's actually going to search for. And yet they also try to put like keywords in their title. And it's kind of like you kind of need to pick a side, in my opinion. You need to either be search-based or you need to be browse-based because it's really hard to do both. I think that's a mistake with titles. Those will probably be the main ones, aside from just the obvious, which is like a lot of titles are just really boring that people write. So it's like try to write them in a way that's kind of like, that's like a video on its own, but it's like try and, good copywriting principles, basically use interesting words, use active language, all that kind of thing. With thumbnails, I think people usually try to include too many elements, too many things. Usually you want one main point of focus if you can, like somewhere for the viewer's eyes to rest. You need like clear things that stand out that people can clearly make out within your thumbnail, as opposed to just having like a gazillion different things. Something that helps with that as well is making sure that once you have those key kind of elements, that you make them stand out sufficiently. And that can be with color contrasting, is a big one. That can also be with using effects like drop shadows and strokes and stuff to make that thing stand out a bit more. I know I'm kind of going over stuff that everyone talks about, so maybe a little bit of a more niche thing that I kind of think about a bit is like making the thumbnail as believable as possible. So I think a lot of people will try to tease what's happening in their video in their thumbnail, but the thumbnail is so heavily edited and that scene is kind of recreated in a really dodgy, sketchy way that it just feels like there's a high chance there's going to be clickbait, or that someone's just created that thumbnail and that thing's not actually going to be in the video. So yeah, I think about like when I look at a thumbnail sometimes, I'm like, how believable is this? Like, is a viewer going to look at this and think, oh, this like actually is shown or happens in the video? Or does it look super doctored and like post-produced to the point that they're like, that could never happen, or that's surely not in the video. So believability is maybe something that I think isn't talked about very much. Yeah, and like ultimately it comes down to, as well, kind of like with titles, like you need the actual title itself needs to be engaging. The actual thing that you're teasing in your thumbnail needs to be interesting and engaging. So that kind of more hinges on like the video idea, because if you don't have a good video idea, then there's not really much you could do. Like you can be the best title writer and thumbnail writer in the world, but if your video is like how to shoot a 3-point shot in basketball, or like I shot a 3-point shot in basketball, like that's already been done a million times. It's not that interesting, not that exciting. And so like, it doesn't really matter what you do with the title or thumbnail, you're going to have a hard time getting that video to do well. On the other hand, if you have like a video that's like, I shot a 150 meter basketball shot or something like that, like there's a lot more you can do with that title and thumbnail, because the actual core content itself is like interesting. So not really a title or thumbnail hack specifically, but it's kind of, I think, a very big portion of what makes your title and thumbnail good is having a good video idea. So like a test that I think about sometimes that I made a post about, and this is more for browse-based content sometimes, but is like describe your video in as few words as possible. That's your title. And if that title isn't interesting, then chances are your video isn't very interesting. So like you look at Mr. Beast or Airax videos and stuff, right? Their titles, yes, there's like little things they do, but overall, like in general, usually they just try and describe what the video idea is as effectively as possible. And the reason it works is because their video ideas are so interesting. If you did that with an idea that wasn't interesting, that's not going to work. So yeah, if you're writing a title or designing a thumbnail and you're really struggling to make it interesting or engaging, or something that you think people would really want to click on, or that stands out from your competitors, chances are there might be a deeper problem, and that is that the actual content that you're creating that title or thumbnail for isn't exciting enough to actually be able to market it properly.
Got it. And So we mentioned you do interview style content sometimes, and I noticed you take a very different approach than a lot of interview videos on YouTube. Like most people will just leave them unedited, but yours are edited to be very like efficient and retention focused. Can you walk us through your process for these interviews and like how much do you typically cut out?
Yeah, so usually before the interview, I will have an idea of how it is that I'm going to package the video. So going into, and then I will reverse engineer that when I say package, I'm talking like title and thumbnail. And I'll reverse engineer that title and thumbnail with the questions that I ask in the interview, basically. So let's say what's a recent one that I'm looking at? So a recent one that I'm working on is like it'll probably be positioned a little bit more interesting than this, but it's like 5 editing techniques that that retain viewers on YouTube. I know that's kind of the title that I want, the title and thumbnail and angle that I'm going to take in general for that video. And so when I'm talking to different YouTube editors, I'll structure my questions so that their answers will be highly relevant to that video idea. So that's the first thing, because I think it's really hard sometimes to just have a conversation with someone and to then pick an interesting moment out of that and make that the whole podcast. I think that only really works when the person you're talking to is very well known or very interesting or very famous. And even then, sometimes it can be challenging unless they're like a A+ level celebrity. So yeah, I pick a way I want to package it, then reverse engineer questions around that. Then I'll interview them. Usually, it might take 45 minutes or an hour. And then from that, we cut out the bits that are most relevant to the actual content that we want to produce within that video. Again, based on what we think the title and thumbnail will be. And then we package that up into an entire video. If it needs some more explanation, then sometimes I'll come in and do some like voiceovers and like stitch things together. If not, then we can just let it flow. And it's definitely not the most time efficient way to do it. But for the kind of content that I'm trying to create, where I try to create a little bit more like quality over quantity, I think it serves the goal better than it would if I just posted, raw, unedited 45-minute kind of conversations.
100%. And like you mentioned, you record 45 to an hour. Like, and how much does the final edit end up at typically? Is it like 30 minutes? Or you're cutting out like 15, 30 minutes of footage sometimes?
Yeah. The last couple of videos that we've done, I recorded for an hour and 20 minutes, and we cut that down to about 15, 20 minutes.
Wow.
So it's pretty strict. Partly that is me, like formulating my words and saying things in an effective way. And so like sometimes I'll do multiple takes and stuff like that, but also I kind of just record everything and then we just take the interesting moments from that. Because sometimes when you're scripting or you're kind of working out what type of video you want to create, it might seem very different or have a very different feel on paper compared to how it ends up actually turning out. So I've found that it can be, for me, a way that kind of works is just to record like literally everything. And then once I've recorded everything, we can go through and pick out the most interesting moments. And then we like have a guarantee of what's actually going to be interesting.
Got it. If you could create an entire channel from the ground up now that has nothing to do with what you currently do, what would it be on?
Yeah. My editor and me were talking about this the other day, actually. Man, we have a bunch of ideas. I don't know if I want to give them away because some of them we might actually be working on. So
that's true.
I do have a few other projects that I'm working on, some other channels and stuff.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, we've got some ideas. What's like maybe I can give some like principles. Okay. I think something I would do if I was starting on like another channel right now would be I'd probably try and make it a little bit more faceless. I think there are definitely advantages to being kind of like the face of a channel and having a brand. One of the biggest advantages is with the influx of AI content. I think people content's becoming less and less personalized and less relationship based. And I think that means that the trust in specific like figureheads of certain channels is going to increase because it's going to be more relationship based than say a lot of this AI content. In saying that, the biggest disadvantage I have with like the kind of content I'm creating is that I have to be there to create it. So I would probably for new channels that I'm working on, I would probably work on something that is where it's the type of content that I don't have to be there to create it. I can be there if I want to, but if I don't want to, we can also just scale up production anyway. So that'd be something I'd think about. Like I said, there are disadvantages to that where it's a lot harder to differentiate yourself. It's a lot harder to build a real relationship with your audience and get them to take actions and that kind of thing. But pros and cons.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. I think it was more of a question to see if you were going to expand the content that you're making. And it's cool to hear that you are because your content has changed over time. We're coming towards the end. So a tradition we're trying to cultivate on the podcast is asking our interviewee if they could shine the spotlight on another creator. Who else should the audience watch or check out?
I want to pick someone who like would actually... I mean, there's like obviously names that come to mind, like one of my favorite creators, and I'm lucky enough to kind of have got to know him a little bit personally, is like Ed from Film Booth in the YouTube education space. Cool. But like he's already quite big, so it feels like a cop out just to promote him because he's not going to notice. I want to see if I can find like a smaller channel that's...
Well, it can be whatever you want to answer.
I think there's a guy called Tyler Fleshman, FLEISCHMAN. He's got like 23,000 subscribers, so like a significant channel, but not giant. He has some really good content, so I would recommend people check him out.
And is that like YouTube education?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. What's a game or a piece of content that you're currently obsessed with and why? You said you haven't been gaming much recently, but...
It's not really a piece of content, but I'm going to go with it. I'm a fan of Alex Hormozy at the moment. So I've been like listening to a lot of podcasts and stuff from him. I know he's kind of like pop culture right now, but like I come from a bit of a marketing background. So like I tend to feel like I have an okay bullshit detector in like that space. And I think he's legit. And I know a lot of friends who are a lot more knowledgeable in that area than me, like, multi-millionaire kind of entrepreneur people and stuff, and they think he's legit as well. So yeah, I've just been binging like a lot of his podcasts.
Cool. No, that's great. Any final words you want to leave the audience with?
I think something that I think is useful for me. A lot of people find this morbid, but I think remembering that you're mortal, remembering that you're not going to be around forever, remembering that life is going to go by very, very quickly for most people. You're not getting any younger. Like, this is the only opportunity you've got. So you might as well do whatever it is that you want to do. You might as well just start. There's never going to be a perfect time to start or do what it is that you want to do. But you can still do it anyway. So I think that's what I would say.
Cool. No, you heard it here, folks. You're right. Where can people find you on the internet?
Yeah, so probably YouTube channel is the easiest one. That's Grow Your Gaming Channel. Yeah,
great. Awesome. Thanks so much for being on today.
Cool. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course.
This episode was recorded with Streamyard. If you want to record a podcast like this, check out the link in the description to get started.
Thanks for joining us on Inside the Creator Studio. See you next time.